7.1, Terlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before you is the Road Protection Bylaw 2021-11. First reading has occurred. The recommended motion is that council move second and third reading of the respective bylaw. Behind it is background information and the bylaw.
Okay. Thank you, Terlin. Somebody want to move second? Ernest? Any questions or comments? Not seeing any. Vote. Dustin? Did you vote? You're against? Okay. That's carried. Third reading. Richard's moving third. Vote. Durst, did you vote? Carried. 7.2, Terlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before you is bylaw 2021-10, council procedural bylaw. First reading has occurred at the 23rd of March meeting, council meeting. The recommended motion is that council provide second and third for the procedural bylaw.
Thank you. Richard?
I'll make the motion for second reading.
Okay. Any questions or comments? Robin?
Thank you, Mr. Reeve. I'm just scrolling up here right now. When it comes down to the conduct portion of this, it appears to me that there is potentially a conflict between the conduct and how we deal with it and how our procedure for our code of conduct is under the formal and informal. So this, I'm just trying to scroll up to find a page here. I think it's, let's just go over it. 5.3 on page 84 of the agenda package. So it talks about what councillors shall not do. You can go down to page 85. It says that if a councillor, sorry, where is this here? Removal of a councillor. I remember reading that it had talked about the potential of censuring. And I'm just wondering if that conflicts with the code of conduct and which would take precedent or which is the guiding document in that case.
Terlin?
So, Mr. Chairman, if council proceeds with this, then we would look at the harmonization to ensure that they're both reflective of each other. Because in here in the procedural bylaw, it refers to the code of conduct.
Yeah, it definitely does. It refers to the code of conduct. But what this gives the ability to basically name the counselor on the spot. They have the ability to apologize or to be removed. And the way that I read it is if they were to be removed, council could immediately move on to censure them at that point versus having, as the code of conduct has, there's a process for investigation, a process of, making the claim, having the ability to, rebut and due process. I don't see due process as much in this. I think that this makes sense while running a meeting, but I do think that there may need to be some clarification as to how those overlap, just as I read through it earlier here.
So under 5.3C, it does refer to the code of conduct. This bylaw would, and you're right, is the day-to-day dealings of the meeting. Do you have any comments further to that, Leslie Ann?
Yeah, so I think what this bylaw, it's the procedure of the meeting, so the happenings that are actually going to happen in the meeting. And if there's any sanctions or anything, that would come out of the counselor code of conduct. I mean, if you have a suggestion, if there's something that you think that should be removed.
Yeah, maybe under, so 5.5B IA. So it says if a counselor has been named, fails to fails or refuses to apologize, council may pass a motion to A, censure the counselor, B, require the counselors immediately leave the chambers. I'm fine with leaving. That's kind of maintaining order within the chambers. But the way that I interpret censuring the counselor would be to put in sanctions. To put in sanctions without process, I think would be in contravention to our Code of Conduct Act.
So, Mr. Chairman, could we possibly put in there to refer to the code of conduct?
I think if we remove A,
Yep.
that handles the day-to-day. If censuring is something that is desirable, then we may just choose to formally issue a complaint that then gets tackled through the Code of Conduct.
Sounds, yep, that sounds really good. Yeah, that's very fair. Yep. Yep. Because there's another mechanism in place to deal with.
Yeah,
Yep.
and I think that
Yep.
the mechanism that's in place is good and it's appropriate, and this may just lead to quick decision-making that isn't always the best.
Okay. Richard, are you okay to change to the second reading as amended? Or do you want us to vote on this?
I'm still struggling in my mind how the changes or why it's necessary. So I've been trying to write this down, but probably I think it's best if we all voted on it. Okay.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's certainly friendly. It's just removing redundancies and something that to pass this right now, we would have to pass this with the acknowledgement of having to amend our existing
big bylaw.
bylaw. And the existing bylaw, as it's written, is good because it allows for due process so that we can't just get upset, make a decision and sanction somebody on the spot. This would allow for that.
Yep.
Whereas the bylaw that stands right now allows for process.
That sounds fair. Ernest?
Well, Councillor Kerpue could just move an amendment here and
Yeah.
we'll vote
Either
on it
or.
and move
And then move
Yep.
forward with,
Yeah,
the
we
second
don't have
reading.
to have friendly anything. It's probably better if he just moves the amendment and.
Yeah, so thank you, Councillor Moody. I'll move to amend it by removal of 5.5 sub B, I, and the removal of A. Is that crystal clear, Les? Thank you. All right.
Okay, any questions on that? Not seeing any? Vote. Okay, that's removed. Is there any other questions or comments? Not seeing any? And we're voting on second
As amended.
as amended. Yeah.
Yep.
Vote. Carried. Okay, vote on third. Vote. Dustin's moving third. Vote. Carried. So we'll skip over 8.1. So we'll go to CAO's report. Alf, you want to move the report so we can discuss? Okay. Does anybody have anything to discuss on the, or questions for the CAO on the report? Dustin?
I guess it's kind of an Ag Service Board question. Has there been any correspondence from the government over strychnine as to if they're doing anything to replace it. We haven't heard anything at all from our end, so I was curious if there's anything that came down through the RMA, because I know there was a motion there as well.
Yeah, there's a resolution that went forth and, yeah, a year or so ago now, I guess, would that have been? I haven't seen any further documentation on that. Yeah, PMRA hasn't, like, there hasn't been any correspondence that I've seen from them.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah, very unfortunate. Yeah, very unfortunate.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to thank our Director of Corporate Services, John Belanger. He is retiring, and I just want to thank him for his dedicated service to the organization and for everything that he has done, and we truly appreciate it. So if you see him today, please thank him. Pardon?
When's his final day?
Next Thursday.
Next Thursday. Okay. Thank you for that. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Not seeing any other questions, so ask for the vote on the CAO report. Vote. Carried.
Mr. Chairman, in regards to that, does Cypress County want to send a letter from council to PMRA in regards to the urgency of that? Oh, because we need strychnine. Is that something that you would like to do?
Dustin?
I think it wouldn't be a terrible idea. You know, I wouldn't necessarily word it on the strychnine basis, but something to replace strychnine
Right.
is more along the lines. I think they've come put the hammer down on strychnine that we're not going to see it again. But I think we should word it, there needs to be something to replace it.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we're going to have some catastrophic damages that come out of this.
Yeah. No, for sure. So, Mr. Chairman, yeah, we can forward a letter under the Reeve signature. That's cool. And we'll CC it to all the municipalities and our MLA and the Minister of Ag. Is that cool?
Okay. Dustin, you want to make that motion then? Any questions on it? Vote. Carried. Reeve and council reports. You guys have seen mine in there. Dustin, do you want to start?
I don't think I have anything to report.
Okay, Ernest? Robin?
Just a small but exciting report. I guess some of you may have seen some of the press releases in the last week and a half with regards to FCM. As a part of the committees and boards, when we talk about advocacy, there's some primary items that are of big importance when we lobby the government. One of these has always been the gas tax. We've been, for the last couple of years, been lobbying hard for a permanent doubling of the gas tax. We generate about, and Terrell, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's about 2.5 million a year is what we receive from the federal government through the gas tax. We were informed in the last couple of weeks here that this coming year that the government will be doubling that. So that's going to be a lot more coming in to help out with projects that we have going on. Just it's a real positive thing. An extra couple $1 million never hurts. It's not a permanent doubling. We'll continue to push for that, but we'll take that when we get it. As well, I've had previous conversations with Councillor Vossler with regards to the advocacy efforts on the carbon tax and the potential of subsidies or I guess omissions or not taxing the farmers as heavily on the carbon tax side of things. It seems like that bill is actually beginning to take up some pretty good, get some good traction. We had an update from the West Committee here recently, and they're continuing to push harder and harder on that as well. So it sounds to me like we're getting some good things happening. One of the things that was most exciting in our most recent update was that if you start listening to the language of Seamus O'Regan, I believe is our Minister of Natural Resources and or is it Natural Resources? I think it is, or Energy. I think it is Natural Resources. And the language that they're starting to use more and more at the federal government level in the areas that impact our resource sector are beginning to mirror a lot more of the language that we're using from an advocacy side. So there's definitely been an impact that's being made there. So that's my update. Other than those FCM conversations, it's been pretty quiet the last 2 weeks.
Alf,
No, I got nothing to report.
Richard,
On Wednesday, March 24th, I attended a Community Futures Entrecore meeting in the morning. In the afternoon, I was here at the county for the Halo check presentation. On Tuesday, March 30th, I attended a Verge Economic Development Alliance meeting. Wednesday, March 31st, a pre-presentation of the Irvin Library. Darcy and Joan and I were here for that. And yesterday, I attended a short meeting at the Rotary Dunmore Park. That's that park that we've been working with the Rotary Club for the last 3 years on getting everything in place so they can have their, actually it was for their centennial tree planting. So we're a little bit behind 3 years, but it's very positive. There's a whole lot of work going on over there. So so that's great. And this will be for future discussion down the road. What's the plan for this gas tax that they're talking about? That like we're getting these rebate checks for the gas tax. So once we go with over half or more of electric vehicles, what are they going to do for a gas tax? But is that something you guys even have talked about?
No, other than the fact that right now, a lot of the gas. So I don't know how the federal government receives it. All I know is that there's the money that's being received is being reallocated and trickled down to municipalities to spend as they wish. So
Yeah.
that's the way that it stands right now. I
so
don't know.
much per liter.
What's that?
So much per liter at the pumps goes back for
Yeah,
the gas
yeah.
tax.
Yeah, it's possible. And so what's nice is, and it's a little bit misleading because the government was originally raising funds that way. They're using this more as like a municipal stimulus fund. It's being called the gas tax because it's been used as that for the last 4 or 5 years. But regardless, it's a positive things for municipalities. Yeah.
It's great. I was just wondering that, so we're pushing electric vehicles, which don't use gas or diesel, so there's no tax there.
Yeah.
So what do they expect to use in return? But that's a whole new conversation.
Yeah.
So we'll let it go.
Okay.
That was a good one.
So, Mr. Chairman, just to clarify for gas tax, so we received 400. However, we've had a few years of unallocated, so we had the 2.5 million there. So that's how that is. We've accumulated and applied it to 120. So that's where the 2.5 comes in. Yeah. So then the 400 is what we get yearly, which is very good as well.
Yeah.
Which is wonderful. We will take it.
Okay, that was it, Richard. By the time we get this park built over there, we'll be up to 120 trees. Darcy, nothing? Okay, somebody want to move the reports? Robin? Any questions on them? Not seeing any. Vote. Carried. 11.1, Terrelyn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before you, under new business, is the land roller purchase. There is background information, and in the previous direction, there's an ASB resolution 2021-11, and the recommended motion is that council direct administration to purchase the land roller with an attachment leveling blade up to a maximum of 45,000, with funding coming from the vehicle and equipment replacement plan. There is substantial background information here for your review. And do you have any questions?
I got Dustin.
Okay, I'll move number one, and I'll just give you a little history behind here. This is kind of Shane's baby, but I'll take it on since the rest of my board decided they needed not to be here this morning. So through conversation with the Ag Service Board, we had kind of undertook the idea of putting a blade on the front of our current land roller to use for leveling off gopher mounds and rough spots in fields. We've had quite a bit of interest in the idea of it, and after doing some research into our current land roller and to engineer it and get it that it's possible to do, it really is not a feasible option to do to the current machinery. So we're looking at purchasing a new one, and being a much bigger size roller, there's quite a bit more application for rental as well. I know the current roller gets used a bit, but not a whole bunch, but going to a bigger one and giving the option of having a large water filled roller, or with the ability to do some gopher hole leveling, especially with strychnine being gone now, is kind of a thing that we found kind of essential. So here it is before you. And I'll try to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions? Richard?
I got to be honest, when I looked at it the first time, I thought you were doing an April Fool's thing, because it was put in right about the time as April Fool's. And I just looked at the cost, Dustin, and I thought you guys were just kind of playing a joke on us, because Shane's pretty good for that, right? But my question is that there is no need, but you're trying to create a need. And then the other part is, I watched the guy behind me, and he's got a big alfalfa field, and he rolls that field, and it's a big roller because he has that track machine to pull it. 2 days later, 3 days later, those gopher holes are back up again. Like everything that they pounded down, the gophers have gone in there and dug them up again, right? So it's a lot of money for a machine that, like, I have never seen one out there that where they level, and if it do, fine. But the other part is, how much are we responsible for supplying the equipment? We've got 2 drills. I thought that was a pretty good commitment, right? That was like $140,000, and now a land roller too, right? So, have you got something in mind for the acreage owners? Like, are we gonna be buying something so we can kind of balance this out a bit? I've got a neighbor that wants to borrow a dethatcher from me, and so, like, where do we end here? Just wanted to know, because it's a lot of money, and there's not a demand for it.
Well, I think there is a demand for it. There's not anything available in this area to rent for this, and that's kind of why it got brought forward. As for land rollers, yes, there is land rollers for rent, but there isn't any land rollers with this attachment, especially heavy land rollers. So most heavy land rollers are around 50 feet, is 50 to 60. This one, it comes in at, I think it was 40, is it 43 or 45? I can't remember off the top of my head which one it is, but one of the two. So it still is a fairly large roller. So it's 42K. So it's double purposed. So it can be used for rolling, but it also can be used for leveling. So the idea behind leveling off is especially molehills, molehills, stuff like that. It's a multi-purpose machine, and I think at the rental rate, what you can do so a rental rate on a roller is usually, I think it's $9 an acre for one of the larger rollers is what you rent them out for. $8 or $9. I can't remember off the top of my head. Something, is that correct, right, Lisa? Yeah, I know. Yeah, so $8. So this one would be right at that same dollar figure. I believe there's a need for it. I believe there's a use for it. Is as to your question for renting out other stuff, we do rentals through the Ag Service Board, and we just haven't had anything brought forward. We have anything from drills to rollers to pipeline plows to tree planters to cattle scales to all sorts of stuff. We actually have a fairly large rental department in the grand scheme of things that way. So hope that answers the question.
Robin?
I'm okay with it. Like, obviously this is coming from the Ag Service Board. I do agree that, you know, upfront the cost is bigger, but at the same time, this isn't exactly something that somebody's going to go out and buy because they have 180 acres. I've been dying to find one of these that I could use just to do 4 or 5 acres and get some rocks down and excuse me. Where was I going with that? I was just thinking a little bit about what Richard was saying with regards to the acreages and stuff. I think that ultimately, if you can rent this kind of equipment from somewhere else, we shouldn't be looking at it. If we can't rent this kind of equipment from somewhere else, if the Ag Service Board is there to find value added for ag, that's kind of the mandate of the board. So is there something like this that can be rented locally?
So rollers, yes, but not rollers with levelers. So when we originally looked at this, we looked at 2 different options. It was either a roller with a leveler on it or just a leveler, because they do make a drag behind leveler as well that does the same purpose. But we figured if we were going to do it, we were going to multi-purpose it. So it was more than just one thing. So doing it as a roller and the leveler, it has 2 purposes instead of just one or the other. And at this too, we're going to look at maybe selling off the other roller as well. If it doesn't have, if there's a lot of call for this one and not a lot of call for the smaller one anymore. Yeah, we have a 14-foot. Yeah, 14-foot water filter.
Is there like a private rental company locally that rents rollers out?
Not water filled.
Okay, so we're basically the one that is the other, like we rent the other style as well. And so to get rid of that, you're saying that if we were to get something like this multi-purpose one, we could sell the other one.
Yeah, that kind of was our idea behind it. We were going to give it a year before we did, just to see what the call for both of them was. Okay. But at that point, we were going to take and make that decision. Was kind of the idea behind it.
Can I ask just a quick follow-up that is connected, and I think it might help with what Richard's asking too, is do we have an amount annually that is kind of a grant from the county to the Ag Service Board for the purchase of equipment and things like that? Like, I think it'd be a lot easier too if we just said, you know what, every year the Ag Service Board has $100,000 to spend on equipment or to find and to utilize, and then they could prioritize it. Because if Dustin's coming here and trying to justify the value, you know, for each piece of equipment versus the council saying, hey, we're going to give you this much, you guys need to prioritize how you spend it, type of a thing. Would that help kind of alleviate your concern too about just kind of coming with another cost and another cost? They can kind of self-govern and prioritize.
Richard?
Well, the only thing I don't like about that is the fact that you have this money and, oh, we should spend it. I feel that Ag Board's good enough that if there's a need, fine. But see, my problem is, Dustin, every day I drive past Flamin Rentals, or is that how you say it? Flamin Rentals. If there was a need for this, they would have one there and they would rent it out. And what we're doing is we're really subsidizing that. If we do this and there's not a significant rate change, we're really doing some subsidizing here, because we charge $100 to take it out, or it's a minimum $200 a day. Well, in my math, it costs us $100 to actually deliver it to somebody, and it costs another $100 to bring it back. So there's nothing for wear and tear or anything else, or to cover the original purchase price of it. But if we've heard that there's 50-foot rollers that are for rent, if there was a need for 40, I think that the private industry would have those out there.
And the only reason that these are a 40 is that's how they make them with this capability. The 50-foot roller with water fill is outrageous. A 40-foot is outrageous too. Like that's a heavy roller if you fill it full of water. Like a 50-foot roller, you can pull with a 160 horse tractor and with no water in it. It takes a pretty big one to pull it if you fill it full. Not saying you have to fill it, but there's the leveling aspect of it's more what we're after here, just because there's nothing like that available.
Darcy and then Ernest.
This one's 20, it's 42 wide, like round.
Ernest?
Sorry, I'm just going to say it first. Sorry, I misread that. It's a 20-foot, not a 42-foot. Like I said, this was Shane's to present, not mine. So I'm kind of picking at the call here, guys.
That's why there's a lineup outside wanting to buy one from us. No, with the land, the blade is very important, especially like I know in my area, a number of people have them because we have gophers or Richardson ground squirrel, but we also have the other underground ones that tunnel and push up dirt piles every, they're not moles, but they're some kind of a ground gopher. But they, so your fields, they push up this stuff all summer. So then you have humps like this you're cutting through, and then pretty soon your whole field is, if you don't have something to level it off. Several of my neighbors have gone that way because it's the only way you can keep your alfalfa fields level enough to cut with a hay bind at 7-10 mile an hour, whatever they roll along at. It's, and I mean, I think it's a wonderful idea. I will have my list on to rent one because I'd always like to have one, but they're expensive. And, where there's a need, this is a useful thing. Let's just approve it and move.
Darcy, you got anywhere?
I think the only reason that it's not, the other one isn't rented out is because it's too small. And with the leveling part, this should be used more often, right? It's more the leveling than the rolling. Because at 14 feet, that's, some tractors are wider than that. That's why nobody rents the other one, right?
Well, I don't disagree that it's probably needed in the area, but if there's rental companies out there, you guys are getting numbers from them because you're saying it's $8 or $9 per acre to rent them. Should we not be allowing them to supply this instead of us stepping on their rental programs? Like, has anybody even gone to them and said, if you got this, we know there's people that are going to want it?
There's only two rental outfits around this area, and one is Flamin, and they don't sell any of them because it's not the products to carry. Because Flamin only carries certain products, so they carry Right Way would be their brand for their rollers, and their Wheatheart and a Wishek dealer. They're dealers in certain things, and that's what they rent out is what they sell. And then the other one's D&H Equipment out of Bow Island, and they sell Mandaco, and Mandaco doesn't make one of them. So the county has supplied a land roller for rental since 1984, just for a little bit of history on it. So and it's that original 14-foot water fill that we have right now.
Yeah, and that says that in here, but it's only averaging 8 a year. I mean, it's a lot of money to put out for 8 a year rentals, right?
That the landowners only rent it 8 times a year.
That's what it says in here.
Well, I don't know. Every time I try to get it, I'm 19 people down the list. I mean, I know 4 or 5 guys in my area that rent it.
The total of the last 4 years, a unit was rented 31 times, averaging 8 times a year. This is their stats in here. That's what I'm reading. It just seems like a lot of money. Which that doesn't matter. That's not going to change with the new one. It's going to be the same. Robin?
Yeah, and let's not kid ourselves. If it goes out to my place or to Ernest's place or to anybody's place and their neighbor sees that he's got it and he's like, hey, when you're done with that field, do you mind coming and hitting a little bit over here? It's very likely, well, it's in the area, do you mind, kind of a thing. It seems to me like something like this could be structured in a way where we can, you have the expense. If the costs aren't covering the overhead on it, we just amend the cost so that it's not costing us money, but it's a service. I don't see the issue with it, especially if we're looking at getting rid of the other one so we don't have just machinery sitting in the yard that isn't being utilized.
Ernest?
Well, I don't think the other one owes us a lot of money, and I would suggest we do two for a while, because not everybody necessarily wants one on blade, and there is a lot of people that want it all at the same time. So, you may not get the blade, but you can have I think they might both be busy. I don't know if Ag Service can handle it, but I think and I mean, that one don't owe us anything.
And I guess one thing to bring up too is they do last a tremendously long time, because there's not a whole bunch of maintenance besides tires and bearings on them. You can get a flat drum, but that's not a good thing if that happens.
Richard?
Dustin, I could come on board with this, but I'd like to see a difference in the charging fees. Like, we're just barely covering staff's time to take it out and then pick it up. Robin stated it quite clearly that if I get done in 3 hours and my neighbor asked me to come and do it or borrow it, that thing's out all day, right? So, and nobody's going to pay by the acre when they can do it by the day. So, I mean, I realize we have our master rates set, but these are not good rates. They're actually terrible rates.
And I agree. I think we can actually up that quite a bit to make some money off it. And I think it should be a by the acre charge. And we'll put an acre meter on it to do it, because it's a completely applicable thing to do. So, because that's where it'll actually pay for itself.
So the old one doesn't have a meter on it?
No.
So what Robin suggests is probably going on quite a bit out there then. Never, yeah.
Yeah, and even if it's by the acre, it's still probably going to be utilized that way. Could we do it in two motions, one for the machine and one to bring back the rates bylaw with an amendment? And we can still move it forward and simplify and cover those issues too.
I think we got some time to do that, because it can probably, well, by the time we get delivery on this thing, it's going to be too late for this year anyways. So I'm thinking it's going to be more of a next year thing anyways, because we're well into where we should be already to be using it. So I'm thinking it's one of those, well, it could be used in the fall, but I'm saying we're not going to get it before the beginning of the season where it's going to be used. So it's going to be at some point throughout the summer, more than likely. So it can come back.
Elf?
And then that way the Ag Service Board could have a discussion on what the rates could be at.
Elf?
Yeah, that would have been my concern also, is the cost of renting it out and the daily rate, so if you can combine the two together somehow, because we would know how long it takes to do an acre approximately, versus, a day or whatever, right? That way it's not sitting in somebody's yard also for 2 or 3 days, just sitting idly. So yeah.
Richard?
Okay, I'm going to change my mind and I'm going to come on board with this, and I will be agreeable with helping the farmers out. And I know this will be mostly the small ones and maybe some of the acreage owners, because the big guys are not going to horse around with a 20-footer, right? And down the road, I know when the hamlets need something, that this will be taken into consideration. So what do you need, Elf?
No, that's it. Okay, who made the motion for this? Dustin did? So we'll vote on this motion and we'll have the other one come in on the rates change. Any other questions on it? Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? Vote. Carried. Okay, what was the other one you wanted, Robin?
That staff work with the Ag Service Board to come back with an amendment to the master rates bylaw for changes on the rental on the roller unit.
Okay. That's your motion? Okay. You're making it? Okay. Any questions on that? Vote. Carried.
So just for some math for you guys, so on a 20-foot roller at 5 miles an hour, it'll do 10 acres an hour.
Okay. $11.2, Terlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Additions to the capital budget. The background information is here. On the 23rd of March, Council adopted the Public Works Operation Plan. Subsequent to that, there is the following items would be requested to be added to the 2021 Vehicle and Equipment Plan to be added. And then on page 158 is the disposition equipment as well. So the recommended motion, Mr. Chairman, is that Council add the identified items to the 2021 Vehicle and Equipment Replacement Plan as presented, and also the disposal of the other pieces of equipment as well.
Thank you. Somebody want to make a motion so we can discuss? Ernest? You have the floor. Do you have anything to say about it?
Well, I think we've talked about this quite a bit. This is not a surprise, so I think it follows where we plan to go with this plan. So we might as well commit to buy the equipment and move forward.
Well, with the numbers, it's just about a wash anyhow. If we get the money back, that the sales will be. Any other questions or comments? Not seeing any. Vote. Carried. 11.3, Terlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Genesis AGM proxy, that the recommended motion is the council appoint Director of Corporate Services, John Belanger, to act as the proxy at the April 8th AGM for Genesis. And the background is below, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Darcy, you're moving that. Any questions on it? Not seeing any. Vote. Carried. 11.4, Terlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The 2021 taxation methodology. So this has been discussed a couple times, Mr. Chairman. Before you is the background and the examples of the different scenarios that council has requested, and the recommended motion is that council direct administration accordingly. Also too, there was at the bottom of, in the middle of, I guess, the page 163 is the farmland. It was requested to present 100% increase and over the 5 years of implementation.
Okay. Robin? Make a motion.
How do you make a motion to direct before you have conversation? Can we just go into conversation? I don't even really know if this is meant to have. Okay, I'm going to make a motion to receive this for information and the conversation as follows. So to clarify as well for people that are listening, just so that everybody understands that the recommendation is not to increase farmland 100% over 5 years. The numbers that we're looking at right now are based specifically on our current tax rates and what would changes in the mill rate lead to over a 5-year period. Okay, just to be clear for those that are listening that aren't completely crystal clear on what we're talking about here. So we've been talking about this
really off and on now for about 2 years. This isn't something that's brand new. I think that when many of us ran and got elected, there were multiple things that were discussed, and I can attest to personal experience in being questioned a lot on the fairness of our tax policy, how we come up with the mill rates that we come up with, and how can we, how can it be more fair? One of the things that I like about the 20th percentile is that it actually gets everybody from all different land uses onto the same percentile or page, so that we actually have a reason why we are where we are versus it just being at the discretion of council, year over year. Now, if we were to go down this road, we would basically be setting making a statement as a county that, we want to be an affordable place to live, but we also want to be a place to live that can afford to provide services and supports to our community. I believe that that's why it's important that we not just keep it at the lowest rate that we possibly can do. And then when we have organizations like the Dunmore Equestrian Center or even the Hockey Academy, or if we talk about seat cleaning plants and facilities that are services that are really good value added programs that the county doesn't necessarily have to do, but if we have the ability to provide it, it's part of the benefit and part of the advantage of living in a community like Cypress County, where we have definitely benefited from resource revenue for a very long time. We don't know how long that's going to last. And before it all goes away, I certainly would hope that we would have the ability to make some good investment and take advantage of the fact that we can generate additional revenue for our community without increasing our cost of living exponentially to our residents. And so to be clear, with this, we have the ability to go to the 20th percentile. We could see an increase in our annual revenue of between $8 and $10 million a year. This would allow us to put all of our land uses at a fair and equal way of taxing. So we're basically looking at the provincial average and identifying that each one of our land uses would be identified and placed at the mill rate that would put us in that 20th percentile. So it puts us in the bottom 20% for cost of doing business, living, tax rates, but at the same time gives us the resources to cover any of our unfunded liabilities that do exist that we're aware of. We have some money in the bank, but that doesn't necessarily go as far as covering all of our unfundeds, as well as future strategic investments. So I hope that we can have some robust conversation about implementing this. I do think that we need to approve this in the next month or two, I would like to say, along with a strategy that helps our ratepayers to understand that with a promise of increasing taxes, that it also comes with a promise of increasing value and security moving forward for the next decade or more. And those are my comments.
Anybody else? Richard?
I definitely think that we're heading in the right direction by looking at this. There's no doubt about it. There is a fear out there that, of course, that we will lose some revenue and we have to be ready for it. And so the comment on the bottom that was put in there regarding a farmland increase is there for discussion. I have had probably half a dozen conversations with some larger farmers, not as a deputy reed, but just as a counselor. And their concern is that they would like to see an increase that is something that they can manage. In other words, something that would happen, say, over 5 years. They can adjust their budget for it. They can adjust their costs. They have not had an increase to speak of for a lot of years, and the understanding is that things have to change. The 1,000%, of course, scares people, and maybe I shouldn't have, but I reassured them that we would never do that to somebody, because we could break people doing that, some of the farmers that way. But at the same time, as somebody that also deals with acreage owners and hamlet people, there's such a huge discrepancy between values. And it's mostly because, of course, the assessment has never been changed by the provincial government, where our assessment, we have a guy that just walked in that has a crew that looks at that on a regular basis. And I think it's every 5 years that it's reviewed. So with this big imbalance, it's something that we have to take a look at as far as that farmland increase. And I'm proposing that, or I would like to see it that probably at the next meeting, we'd have some more information. Have some stuff that I've written out, and we could pass that on and have that available for the next one. But one of the things I'd like to see happen during that discussion is that the farmers that are present would bring in a tax assessment for a quarter land, so that we would actually have it in front of you when we discuss how much of a change it would be. I have quite a bit of information that I've got from our tax department as to the increase. 100% sounds huge, but on a piece of grassland, it's $40 right now. So at the end of 5 years, you'd be paying $80 more. So percentage-wise, it's terrible. Cost-wise, it's nothing, or not very little. How's that sound? Okay. So, but if you guys would bring in a couple of assessments of showing those what you're paying per quarter, and we use those as an examples when we work on what the increase should be. So one of the other things I have is that someday, as we lose our gas revenue and the other things, we'll have to take a look at residential also, right? And we're not hearing that residential wants their tax lowered. They're okay with that, but we need to have a better balance of everybody. Everybody needs to be treated equally, okay? So like say we went up 4% on our taxes on acreages, well, and hamlets, that's quite a bit. But if you went up 4% on a $40 assessment, that's nothing, right? So we need more discussion, okay?
Robin?
Thank you, Deputy Reboster. I guess what I would say, I agree with the last half of your comments, because I think that everything has to be about fair and balance. And I think that that's why when I brought forward the idea of the percentile-based approach, it's the only thing that I could think of that was a fair methodology, where we could look at it and say, on a provincial average, every single, whether you're farm, residential, small business, non-res, M&E, or linear, you're all at the exact same percentile that is then set by the average of everything. Land assessment will range from $40 to $320, depending on irrigation, depending on the value of the land, the productive value. So that will change a bit. But that's also why assessors exist, is so that they can identify what that productive value is. The mill rate and the percentile side of things allows for a very objective way of identifying, yes, this is fair and balanced because everybody is based on the same rules. And for that reason, I don't think that we can take 100% at farmland as a fair way of going into a new fair system. The new fair system would be that every single rate group gets that 20th percentile attached to it. And to get to the 20th percentile over 5 years, if you look at the breakdown that's provided in page 162, farm would go from 0.00426 to 0.00514. That would be getting it up to the 20th percentile. If you look at what the 100% increase does, it would actually bring it up to 0.0084, which is something like 35% even higher than what everybody else would be at. And I think that that's counterproductive to what we're trying to achieve, which is fair and equal approach and methodology to get to where we want to get to. And so I would like to see us, move forward with something more like that kind of scenario, or is this here scenario B, scenario A? Yeah, scenario B type of thing where, we identify that over the next 5 years, we want to get everybody to that 20th percentile. You're going to see some increases. Residential is already there. They're already there right now. And after 5 years, you're probably going to see, we have our tax policy that exists that has an incremental increase every year that covers cost of living and inflation. That formula is there and it exists already. But what we need to get to is a point where we have a significant system correction on how we view our revenue generation as well as our service delivery and how we finance that. And this is a way that we can get to a point where we can afford to fund the projects that we can, that provide value within the community, at the same time as providing affordability, as evident by the fact that we are the 1 out of 5 as far as, in the bottom 20% of affordability within the county. So I want to see us be able to provide affordable taxes, but with high value. That's, and I believe that we can achieve that with this approach, but we need to make sure that our residents understand where we're going with this. And then we need to start to understand that we need to start spending some of this money within our community, get some of these projects going. Because if we're even considering doing this without considering spending an additional $6 million a year, building projects, getting things happening, getting some excitement in our community, and actually leveraging the opportunity that we've benefited from for the last 30 years, then we're in for a lot of phone calls from angry people. But if we can provide the value and they understand why it is that we're looking at doing what we're doing, I think that we're gonna have a lot more people on board with the approach to this.
Darcy?
Just have a question, Steve, sitting here. If we would go to the 100% for farmland, what percentile would that be in?
We have an 11 o'clock, right?
Yep.
So I don't mind while we have if we table this till after, during, like in the next half an hour, I can get you an answer to that.
Okay, I'll table this. We'll take you want to make a motion to table it for me?
I can, but one comment, if we're going to discuss farm taxes, I would like that information that I worked on with Steve's department and Steve for all the counselors to read over so that we can have a discussion about how much of a discrepancy or how far apart the mill rate, the taxes are versus acreages and farmland. I think that's really important because everybody has acreages and hamlets in their area and we all have farmers. So we're going to have to work with both those situations. Okay. And we have to explain why we are where we are and why we're at that. Okay. So yeah, motion to what? Table.
Okay, vote. Carried. We'll take a quick 4-minute break. That's it. Cut them cigarettes even shorter than half.
Hey, Derek, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, but they're just going to take about a 4-minute break and then we'll get into it, okay?
Not
Just
a
hang
problem
tough.
at all. You bet.
Sorry about that.
Oh, not a problem.
Okay, we have the auditor online here. So I'll give the floor over to you.
Sorry, to me? I apologize.
Yep, it's all yours.
Excellent. Sorry, I really don't like doing these things online. Definitely makes it a little bit more challenging to see certain things and those types of things. So miss some of the visual cues, I guess. Anyways, do appreciate the opportunity to be here today to go over the audit and to touch briefly on the financial statements. I know a number of you have had to hear me talk about audits before, but whenever an auditor gets together with those charged with governance, we're required to go through certain things. So I'll take us through those, and then I'll take us into the financial statements and just touch on some of the highlights, I guess, if you will. So just with a couple of the items, I guess, is just with regards to independence. So whenever an auditor meets with those charged with governance, we're just required to just reaffirm our independence. So we do take steps to ensure that KPMG, myself, and everybody that's working on the audit team is independent of the county. So basically, again, just making sure that there's nobody's related to anybody in a decision-making capacity, that there's no financial dealings outside of the audit and those types of things. With regards to the status of the audit is complete. So we've finished our audit and we're prepared to issue our audit opinion. So our audit opinion is an unmodified or clean audit opinion, subject to our discussion today. Next couple of items that we're just required to talk about would be the framework in which the financial statements are prepared. So consistent with the prior year, the financial statements are prepared in accordance with public sector accounting standards. So again, when we look at that framework, there were no significant changes in it this year. However, one thing we do note is actually that you guys did early adopt a new section with regards to intangibles this year. So that is something that was new and added a little bit of disclosure and changed things a little bit on your financial statements. And that's largely just with regards to the water rights. Other key items would be with regards to the accounting policies which management uses. So in the financial statements, note 1, when we get into the financial statements, we go through some of the key accounting policies that management uses in preparing the financial statements. As auditors, we're required to look at those policies, see how they're implemented, ensure that they're consistent and appropriate and free of any significant biases or anything like that. So if we had any concerns, we'd bring those to your attention. There's no concerns from those perspectives. Other key items that we're required to discuss would be the use of estimates. So in preparing the financial statements, as in prior years, management is required to make certain estimates. As auditors, we're required to look at those estimates and assess the inputs and those types of things and how they're implementing them. And if we had any concerns, we'd be required to bring those to your attention. Just the 3, I guess, key estimates that management makes with regards to the financial statements would be the estimated useful life of your tangible capital assets. So when you have a capital project or you purchase a piece of equipment, it doesn't get expensed right away. Instead, it gets set up on your statement of financial position as an asset, and then management estimates the useful life of those assets, and then they're amortized into your expenses over that estimated useful life. So as auditors, we have to look at your historical experience, what your peer group's doing, those types of things. Again, no concerns from that perspective. One of the other items that we look at would be around deferred revenue. So one of the items when we're going through your statement of financial position, you'll notice that there's a line item around deferred revenue. And deferred revenue usually makes up of a couple of things. Sometimes it's prepaid property taxes, but a lot of times what it is it's when you receive funding from external sources that have stipulations attached to that. And so that would be like receiving funding for a certain capital project or those types of things. So what the standards require is that even though you receive the cash, you're not able to recognize the revenue right away until you've met the stipulations attached with that funding, and then you can recognize the revenue. So there are certain estimates around whether or not you've met those stipulations. A lot of times they're just attached to whether or not we've spent the money appropriately or not. So we're required to look at that, how management's allocated those expenditures. We agree the expenditures to the supporting documentation, those types of items. So no concerns around that estimate. And then the last one that will impact your statements a little bit more, is with regards to the valuation of receivables. So this is an item we've talked about before. Obviously in the past, we've packed a significant receivable with regards to a fire that occurred over the last year. Again, when we look at it initially, you say, okay, we go back a few years, looked at the receivable, we continued to try to collect it. But as time has progressed and legal opinions have been acquired and clarity has been on, it's becoming more and more difficult to assess whether or not that receivable has value. So in the current year, an allowance has been taken against that receivable. Now, that doesn't prevent the county from continuing to pursue everything there, but what it does is it just kind of helps be a little bit more conservative when we're looking at the statement of financial position. So again, as that has clarified a little bit more, the decision to take that valuation allowance is appropriate given the framework. Other than that, I guess the last item would be just with regards to if we had any unadjusted audit differences or adjusted audit differences for that matter. The one nice thing about your current management team is that they're very, throughout the year, as kind of issues come up, they're in contact with me and we discuss through items and those types of, if there's any accounting issues or strange items. So they're, very proactive from that perspective. We're talking through issues throughout the year so that when we get to your year end, there's no unadjusted differences, there's no adjusted audit differences, everything's already been adjusted for and there's no surprises. Now, there's a couple of good things that come out of that, and probably the main thing is it means that the internal reporting that you're getting from management is very consistent with what you'll see on the audited financial statements. So the information that you're getting internally generated is accurate and helpful for decision-making purposes. A lot of times if we're dealing with entities that have to have a lot of adjusting entries and there's not that communication throughout the year, you start to worry that maybe the information that they're getting throughout the year isn't appropriate, but that's not the issue here. Your team's, like I said, very, very proactive from that perspective. So those are kind of the highlights of the audit findings before I take us into the financial statements. Again, I mentioned at the start, sometimes with these remote things, it's hard to see if there's any visual cues or anything that people might have any questions. So I'll just maybe pause for a moment and see if anybody has any questions or comments before we move on to the financial statements.
Okay, does anybody have any questions? I'm not seeing any at this point, so continue on.
So I think I can share to the screen, which should open up for our financial statements here. So hopefully everybody can see the financial statements.
Yep, we can see them.
Okay, perfect. So just make sure I'm controlling it here. So again, taking us through the first couple of pages is the independent auditor's report. So as I'd mentioned before, consistent with what you would have seen in the prior year, we are prepared again to issue that unmodified or clean audit opinion. So the opinion kind of goes through that. It also indicates kind of the basis of our opinion. So again, what we're doing is we're preparing an audit in accordance with Canadian auditing standards. The report also goes through the responsibility of management, as well as your responsibility with regards to the financial statements. While we assist management in making sure that they're meeting the reporting requirements, the underlying information is the county. So there is some responsibility with regards to that. Taking us actually into the financial statements, the first page with numbers on it is our statement of financial position. And I realize management's probably gone through internal statements with you guys previously, so I apologize if I'm kind of retreading on anything that they may have talked about in the past and those types of things. So I guess kind of the first couple of items to look at would be with regards to our cash and cash equivalents. We do see a bit of an increase this year over the prior year. There's a couple reasons for that. One is just our day-to-day operations, and then we'll reflect a little bit later when we get into the statement of cash flows. But when we look at at how the operations went. They did generate a positive cash flow. That, coupled with the fact that we have an increase in our deferred revenue this year, is really one of the items that drives our cash quite a bit this year. So again, keeping in mind the deferred revenue is when we've received funding, but we haven't met the stipulations to actually recognize it into revenue. So we have the cash, we just haven't realized it yet. And a lot of that is when we start looking at kind of various, when we received funding, when projects could be completed. Obviously this year a little bit different than most years when we're dealing with a pandemic and those types of things where, you know, certain projects need to be deferred and those types of items. Moving down to our taxes and grants in place. So our receivables went up a little bit from that perspective. There's a note here that provides a little bit more information, but again, a lot of this has to do with timing and various other items that have come into that play. Our trade and other receivables, this is where we do see a bit of a variance. We do see a decrease from the prior year. And this is, of course, is with regards to that allowance that I spoke about earlier. So we did have that situation where we've taken the allowance. So of course we can still pursue that receivable, but we've just taken that valuation allowance. So it's reflected in the statements. It reflects down in our expenses. And we note here that we have that decrease in potentially what our value of our receivables are. Accrued interest, we see a slight increase there. When we see our increase in our investments and our cash, we would expect to have an increase in our interest receivables. Investments, we do see an increase in that line item. There's a little bit more information on note 6, but a lot of that has to do with the fact that we've taken some of our cash where it's been invested in. It's interesting, one of the things that management's looked at, and this impacted our cash a little bit as well, is that with interest rates being so modest, some of your current bank accounts that are being offered are actually offering a better interest rate than some of the longer term investments. So rather than lock up your capital at low interest rates, your management team is using the shorter term rates or shorter term options to maximize your rate of return and keep yourselves liquid. Moving down to our debt charges recoverable. This is situations where we've borrowed money on behalf of others. We have the amounts coming back. So again, we see a decrease there. That's just our normal regular scheduled repayments. Moving down into our financial liabilities, we see overall that there's a bit of an increase over the prior year, and largely where it's coming from, again, is that deferred revenue. So again, we'll look into the fact that we received certain funds this year, like the federal gas amounts and those types of amounts that we've received, but we haven't spent. Again, we haven't met those stipulations, so that increase there. Changes in our accounts payable and accrued liabilities, largely just due to certain timing differences in those types of items. And then our long-term debt, the decrease there, just again, our regular scheduled repayments. Overall, or I should say, when we get down to the next line item, which is this subtotal here called the net financial assets, what this line represents is if we were to take our financial assets less our liabilities, would we have enough to cover off all of our obligations? So if we look, the county over the last few years has been in a very good position where we do have significant financial assets to cover off any obligations that we might have. We do see an increase in that position this year, again, largely to us staying liquid in that perspective. Moving down to our non-financial assets, as opposed to the assets up above, which are ones that we'll collect or will be eventually converted into cash. These non-financial assets represent your assets that are consumed in your operations. So a couple of key items, I guess, that come into play here. We've got our capital assets where we see a bit of an increase this year. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is when we look at our prepaid expenses below, some of this has to do with regards to water rights. So in the prior year, we had acquired some water rights. We weren't quite sure what we were going to be able to do with them at the time. Now we're able to keep them and use them effectively. So now they've been effectively moved up into our capital assets. This is, earlier I'd mentioned that you guys had early adopted a section in the framework, and that's what this is occurring here, is that we've actually, if we look in the past, public sector accounting standards did not allow municipalities to recognize purchased intangibles like water rights. Now you're able to, and so that's where we see some of that recognition there. Inventory for consumption, bit of a decrease there. A lot of that has to do with just the timing of when we're doing certain purchases or crushes, those types of things. And then our prepaid expenses, again, that decrease there is largely due to that movement of that intangible. Overall, when we look at our accumulated surplus, our residual ownership in our assets less our liabilities, we see a bit of a decrease this year. So while we have seen an increase in our financial assets, our operations resulted in a bit of an erosion of our equity. And a lot of that has to do with our non-cash expenditures of amortization that I spoke about earlier being one of the estimates. So the next statement is our statement of operations. And what this page tries to do is tell the story of what occurred with the county from a financial perspective for the year. So a couple of key items here would be if we first look at our operating revenue. Overall, we do see a bit of a decrease there. And a lot of that has to do with our net municipal taxes. That largely being driven by our the changes in the linear that we've had to deal with over the last couple of years really taking impact here. User fees and sales of good, we do see a bit of a decrease there. It's interesting, most municipalities that I'm talking to and dealing with right now have seen obviously a decrease there. A lot of it has to do with the pandemic, of course. So that's something we kind of expect. Moving down our penalties, fees, and permits, we do see a bit of an increase in that perspective, as well as from government transfers. There's a little bit more in Schedule 1 on that. With regards to it, some of the key things around our government transfers this year, we received the MOST grant, which was the funding associated with the pandemic. So that coming in and some of that money being spent recognized helped bolster that number up a little bit this year. Our investment income down a little bit from the prior year, but still fairly strong compared to what we were anticipating from a budget perspective. Looking at the decrease there, again, we're in a more modest interest environment. So as things kind of continue on, and obviously shortly after after things happened last March with the pandemic, interest rates continue to kind of go lower and lower. So again, that's something where you see that transition from having, taking your investments as they mature and reinvesting them in long term at very low rates, or keeping them liquid in very I guess, I'm sorry, I'm using the term liquid again twice there, I apologize, but keeping them in liquid investments so that you guys can use them or act upon them as rates improve. The next part of the statement of operations takes us through the expenses. So overall, we do see our expenses decreasing. When we start looking at some of the specific line items, though, in particular, other discounts and adjustments, we see quite an increase over the prior year in that line item. That is, of course, where we have that valuation allowance that I spoke about earlier. Once you factor that out, we would see quite a decrease in our expenses. And again, going down, that's from a couple of things. One is, of course, you guys trying to control expenditures, and so operating as effectively as possible. But also when we start thinking about some of our operations and how things would have had to be deferred or not quite operating at full capacity this year as a result of the pandemic. Overall, before we get into our capital funding and other types of items, we do see a deficiency of 1.6 million. So again, thinking about it, that 1.6 million, a large portion of that is being driven by that valuation allowance that we talked about before, as well as that amortization or non-cash expense. If you were to adjust for those types of items, we'd probably be we'd probably be in we'd be in a positive position if we were just to adjust for the allowance. And that, it's interesting enough, we've seen that across a lot of municipalities, that as certain cost centers, so things that normally where we're providing services to stakeholders, how some of those had to be scaled back this year, we didn't quite experience as much expenses on those items. And so as a result, we're seeing a lot of municipalities kind of seeing a bit of a modest surplus from their day-to-day operations. Moving down to our capital funds, when we look at the prior year, we do see some of our capital funding down from the prior year, and quite a bit down from what we had anticipated from a budget perspective. Largely, though, looking at this is just due to the fact of when capital projects were being done and whether or not they had to be deferred as a result of again, the pandemic and various other items. Overall, we have a modest deficiency. So again, this is keeping in mind, this is an accounting deficiency, right? So again, some of it's driven by those non-cash items that we talked about above, but a very modest deficiency overall, which again resulted in that decrease in our accumulated surplus, or that residual ownership that I talked about the county had in its assets less its liabilities. The next statement is our change in our net financial assets. So I spoke about net financial assets earlier when I was talking about the statement of financial position. So your net financial assets are when you have when you take your financial assets less your obligations or your liabilities, and that's the number we came up with, or that's the ending result. So as I mentioned before, we did see an increase this year, and the increase was about 3.5 million. And really what that is when we take your excess of or deficiency this year of revenues over expenditures, and you adjust for the cash items of the capital assets that you acquired. So this includes the new projects that you undertook, as well as the movement from our prepaid expenses. Then we normalize it also for the non-cash expenditures like that amortization that I spoke about earlier, as well as changes in our inventory and changes in our prepaid expenses. And again, that big issue on our prepaid expenses this year is that movement of those water rights. Overall, we saw our net financial position of financial assets go up this year. So again, showing that it was a strong year from that perspective, even though we did have that deficiency. Moving down to the next statement is the statement of cash flows. And I apologize, I think I always say the same thing when I talk about a statement of cash flows, that regardless of the type of entity that you're looking at, whether it be a municipality or not-for-profit or even a for-profit, this is a very interesting statement to help kind of tell the story of what occurred throughout the year by really trying to take your deficiency this year, but your deficiency of revenues over expenditures, adjusting it for non-cash items like your amortization of capital assets or the accounting loss that was experienced on disposition of capital assets, as well as changes in our receivables and payables, to really get down to what was the impact on our bank account at the end of the day. So when we look at this overall, we talk about our cash going up this year. And so our cash overall increased by 2.7 million. So of course, where did that cash come from? If we were to take our deficiency for the year, adjust it for, again, those non-cash items, as well as changes in our receivables, changes in our prepaids, which were part of our capital asset acquisitions, and those types of things, you know, what was our change here? So this very first subtotal represents our cash flow from operations. So if we were to look at kind of just our day-to-day operations this year, we have it generated $15 million. Now the $15 million, again, keeping in mind, we have that amortization, we have those changes in our prepaid expenses, as well as that allowance for that receivable. So once you adjust for that, our day-to-day operations generate 15 million compared to just under 11 million last year. So the next question is, well, what did we do with that money? So a lot of it is, when we turn around, we look at it, you guys invested essentially 8.4 million of it into the capital assets, or the infrastructure, the water rights, the various items that would be consumed in providing services to your stakeholders. We further invested another $4.1 million into the actual financial investments, and we repaid debt of 751,000. So overall, we saw that increase of 2.7, but this tells a very good story of, okay, so, you know, what did we have from a day-to-day operation? What did we do with it? It tells the story of you guys reinvesting and paying off obligations with that day-to-day cash flow. After that, we get into the notes of the financial statements. So the first couple of pages take us through the significant accounting policies. Largely, the policies have been consistent with the prior year. There hasn't been a lot of changes, as I mentioned before. There hasn't been any real changes in public sector accounting standards this year either. So I won't read through these. I've been told I have a terrible storytelling voice anyway, so it'd probably put you guys to sleep. But being that we're moving into further lockdowns again, I guess if you can't go out on Friday night, this might make for an interesting read. But again, the policies are, we're required, as auditors, we're required to look at them, assess whether or not they're appropriate, free of bias, and those types of things. So there's no concerns from that perspective on the policies. Note 2 takes us through significant or recent accounting pronouncements. So this is with regards to future changes in public sector accounting standards. So in the future, there will be some changes to the standards. So this note is largely just in place to help users understand that there are some changes that are coming. A couple of these notes have been around for a while because the adoption of the standards continue to be pushed back by the standard setters. So those are largely around portfolio investments and financial instruments. At some point in time, right now they're planning for April 1st, 2022. So year ends after that. There potentially be some impact on your financial statements depending upon what types of investments we're holding in those types of items. The biggest one, though, that's probably coming up would be around the asset retirement obligations. So this is a new section that will be coming in the near future. A couple of years ago, your team had to take a step back and look at any environmental obligations that might relate to any sites that were inactive. At the time, what the standard setters were hoping to do was to have governments take a hard look at where there might be some obligations and ensure that those are on the books. What this standard is hoping to do is to go past not just the inactive sites, but to have government entities also assess their active sites. So if we've had situations where there's been diesel spills or something like that, that might cost the government money in the future, the idea here is that those might potentially have to be booked depending upon the situations on those types of items. With regards to new standards, as I mentioned, you guys prospectively adopted the amendments that related to intangible assets. So while that wasn't a full change to the standards, it was just some clarity that was added. You guys early adopted that, and those items have been reflected appropriately in your statements. Starting on note 4, we get into some of the numbers that relate to numbers that are on your statement of financial position, statement of operations. So note 4 takes us to our cash and cash equivalents. So we've got our cash, and the cash equivalents essentially are high interest savings accounts that are being held. So what we've got here is a bit more being held there, again, because the interest rates are more favorable in that than some of our longer term investments. Note 5 takes us to our grants and taxes receivable. So again, a little bit more receivables that with regards to those at year end this year. Our tax arrears, though, didn't grow significantly there, so that was good to see. Of course, those ones would be continue to be something you guys be able to collect in the future. Note 6 takes us to our investments, just providing information on the cost and related market values. Note 7 provides some information on our inventory for consumption. So again, we did see a bit of a decrease in our inventory. A lot of time, as I'd mentioned before, when we look at our gravel, a lot of the times that just has to do with when we've done crushes and those types of things. Supplies, again, this can be, again, just depending upon when we're doing our purchases and those types of items. Note 8 provides us with some information on our debt charges recoverable, so just the amounts that we anticipate to collect over the next few years. Note 9, this provides kind of a summary version of some of the information that shows up in a later schedule around your capital assets, so just providing the net book value. Of course, intangibles representing those water rights that I talked about earlier, so obviously a large part of the acquisitions that we saw in the current year. Note 10 takes us to deferred revenue. So it provides us both kind of a flow of how the money came in and amounts that were recognized, as well as amounts that are sitting in our deferred revenue at year end. Note 11 takes us to our long-term debt, shows just what our planned principal repayments are over the next few years, as well as some information on the interest rates. Note 12 takes us to our debt limits. So as required under the MGA, there's some disclosure here on what our debt limits would be and what our amounts in debt are, as well as our servicing amounts. So again, when we look at those, they've changed a little bit with regards to the amounts that we have outstanding and the amounts of income that we've brought in. Note 13 takes us to our accumulated surplus a little bit more. So as I mentioned before, accumulated surplus represents the residual ownership that the county has in its assets, less its liabilities. That residual ownership is really broken into kind of 3 buckets. There's the amounts that represent the equity in your capital assets. So what that represents is your net book value of your capital assets less any debt associated with it. Then you've got your amounts that are in your reserves. So those are your restricted amounts. And then the amounts that are your unrestricted. So these are the amounts that would be available for day-to-day operations that haven't been specifically earmarked like the reserves have. So this note takes us through, again, how the equity and capital assets is calculated. And then again, that breakdown between those amounts that are in our reserves and are unrestricted. Note 14 takes us through kind of the definition of our segmented disclosures. So Schedule 2 essentially takes our statement of operations and discloses it in a different way just to provide more information. It's basically broken down by what we would call segments, or your different areas of operation. And so what this note does is it just kind of talks a little bit about what those various areas are, just providing a bit more information so people can understand Schedule 2 a little bit more. Note 15 provides our salary and benefits disclosures. This is information that's also required under the MGA. Consistent with the prior year, it just goes through and shows the amounts that have been paid out. Note 16 takes us through local authorities pension plan. So obviously we participate in the local authorities pension plan. This note goes through what our contributions were, as well as employees' contributions. So just some information regarding that. Note 17 talks about potential contingency or contingent liabilities with regards to the Genesis Reciprocal Insurance Exchange. Note 18 takes us through financial instruments. So what this does is essentially under the handbook section, so under the standards, if the county had any significant interest rate risk, credit risk, liquidity risk that wasn't kind of already disclosed elsewhere, it's disclosed in this area. So one of the things like credit concentration, we talk about the fact that a large portion of our receivables are held by three people. Last year we had one that made up the largest one. So what happens is, if we look at it, last year we had one receivable representing 93%. This year we have much less receivables and 3 representing 58%. So largely what it's trying to do is say there is some concentration of risk with regards to our receivables, but it's much more manageable now than what it had been in the past. Also, this note, if we had anything kind of different out there that implemented some type of risk regarding our investments or anything else like that, it would have to be disclosed in here. So for instance, if the county was trading in cocoa futures or something like that, we would have to disclose that in here as well. Note 19 just indicates the budgeted information in the statements was the one that you guys approved last April. 21 talks about comparative information. So just with regards to some of the expenditures and various other items, sometimes when management revisits how they're allocating some of the accounts in the current year, we'll look at them and determine whether or not we should reallocate them to give them make it more accurate in the prior year. The bottom line doesn't change, but it's just kind of a recasting of some of the prior years just to ensure the numbers are in accurate places. So that note's included just from that perspective. Note 22 takes us through how COVID impacted us, just in case we forget. Obviously, it's had a significant impact on your guys' operation. But what's interesting, of course, is this note does talk about the amounts of how much of the MOST grant we received and the amount that was recognized into revenue. After that, we get into the schedules. Schedule 1 takes us through the government transfers. So this just shows some of the funding that we received from the province with regards to our operating grants and our capital grants. Schedule 2 takes us through those segmented disclosures that I talked about earlier. So taking your statement of operations and just kind of re-showing them in a different light, just so that there's additional information presented. Schedule 3 takes us through our changes in accumulated surplus. So I talked about earlier that accumulated surplus being our residual ownership in those 3 buckets. This schedule essentially shows how those 3 buckets relate to each other. So when we purchase a capital asset, depending upon where it's funded, how the amounts flow out of either our reserves or out of our unrestricted into our equity and capital assets and those types of items. The next schedule is a schedule of municipal taxes. So this provides us a breakdown of our assessments and the requisitions that we were required to make. Schedule 5 takes us to our expenses by object. So statement of operations shows our expenses by function. Our schedule of segmented disclosures also presented by tries to present it by both function and object, and then this schedule just shows it by objects, just another way to look at our expenses. We talked about the fact that obviously our expenses went down from the prior year. When we look at it, in certain areas you'll see those significant items going down. obviously when we look for some of the significant changes or other, that's where we have that valuation allowance that we talked about earlier. So that's why that number is very large and stands out. Then we've got Schedule 6, which is our schedule of capital assets. So the note earlier just showed kind of a summary version of the assets at the value. What this schedule does is it just shows the breakdown of the cost of the assets less any amortization that we've taken to date. So it gives a breakdown of what's in land improvements, buildings, engineering structures, etc. That is a 100-yard dash through your financial statements. It doesn't, it probably doesn't do justice for the amount of work that your management teams puts into to making sure that you have accurate information. But I respect that. Like I said, I'm probably maybe not the best storyteller in the world. So that's probably the most effective way I could get through it for you guys.
Hey, thank you. Does anybody have any questions? You silenced them all. Either that or you put them all to sleep. I don't know.
That's always the question.
Well, I'm not seeing any questions, so. Looked like everything was on track.
Yeah, no, like I said, the one nice thing about having a proactive management team from your guys' perspective, some of the narrative that I gave you is probably consistent with what you would have heard from them in the past. And a lot of it is just due to the fact that, again, you know, as they're going through items throughout the year, you know, I have phone calls with John or Travis all the time. They, you know, so the accounting that they're doing throughout the year doesn't result in any surprises when we get to the audit.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, I'm not seeing anything about anybody or from anybody, so. Do you have anything else to add, or is that it for your presentation?
That would be it for my presentation.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Sorry for the delay on us being a few minutes late there. We were in a
it's not a problem.
Pretty good topic before we got to 11, so.
Not a problem. Hopefully I was more exciting than that topic.
Yeah, we'll say you were. Okay, thank you very much, and you have a great day.
Thank you.
Okay, what we're going to do here is we have that other one tabled, but we're going to come back to that. We'll do 12.1 and work our way through, and then we can have time for discussion on the tabled one.
Mr. Chairman, so the for the audited financial statements, the recommended motion is that council approve the 2020 audited financial statements and the 2020 financial information return as presented.
Sorry about that, I missed that.
It's okay, it's all good.
Okay, somebody want to make a motion for that? Elf? Was there two motions there or just one? Just one? Okay. Any questions on it? Yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
Because I missed most of it, should I abstain?
You read over your agenda, did you not? So you've received the information already. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, the auditor, Derek just read through the financial statements that was in the agenda package.
Yep. Any other questions? Not seeing any. Vote. Robin? Carried. Okay, 12.1, Tarlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Request for proposal, the statutory plan review on page 164. This is an information brief. In there is the RFP that will be going out with the timelines attached, and the recommended motion is the council move to receive as information.
Okay. Somebody want to, Darcy? Well, it's just received for information. Michelle? Yeah. Let's make that motion. Any questions or comments on it? Not seeing any. Vote. Carried. 12.2, Carolyn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bridge file 7353-2, the bridge structure along the Greyburn. So there is substantial background information for council's review. The recommended motion is that council direct administration to proceed with option 2 with the replacement of bridge 7353-2 with a 18.7 meter low volume steel girder bridge, an estimate of 1.220000, with the balance of the funds, 641,000 being applied for under the MSI grant funding.
Richard.
I'm going to make the recommendation for option 3, which is C. And my reasoning behind that is that on the first two, on A and B, I don't think the bridge is going to get raised. And I would like to see that bridge raised in case we have that, well, when we have that 100-year flood again. And there's some dirt work, but it would be the lesser amount of the dirt work. So very open to discussion on that, but I feel it is important that the bridge is raised.
Any questions? That's why I'm looking around. Kim?
Yeah, through the chair. That was what was brought up on the, I think you guys did a bus tour about 4 years ago. You went on the Greyburn Bridge, and that was the recommendation that was brought up at that time.
Can I have the chair? Yeah, or can I?
Yep.
So did you put the first one in because of the lower funds, the lower amount of money?
That, and it does raise up about 7 decks, so just about 3/4 of a meter. But your option would raise it up quite a bit more and open up the body of the channel.
Okay, and my thoughts are that it's going to happen again. I mean, why wouldn't it? It's happened before, and there's nothing that says it's not going to happen again. So, and those hills get a lot of snow. Well, we know from the October occurrence, right? So,
Well, if we're gonna do it, we should do it right. Any other questions or comments on it? Not seeing any. So, which one was your C, right?
yes, mine was option C with the minor road work, not the major road work. And that shouldn't be an issue, right?
No, that's totally fine.
Okay, yep, that's the one done.
I'm getting screwed up here. Hold on. Yeah.
Okay, I wrote it down wrong, guys. I'm sorry. It is B then, right? Okay, and I said C, so I'm changing that. When I made my notes here last night, I wrote the wrong one down.
One has minor, one has major.
Yeah, so the option 2 has minor road work. And I'm sorry, I wrote it in my notes wrong. So that's the one I want to go with.
The $1.2 million one.
1.4.
1.34 with road work at 641,000 for a total of 1,981,000.
And so then with the balance of the funds, 1.4 coming out as MSI.
That's the one.
Alternative B on page 172. Oh, it had me messed up there too. But like I said, if we're gonna do it, we might as well do it right. That Greyburn's well used, so. Yeah, go ahead, Durs.
Okay, what's the difference between that and then page 174, number 2? is 1.2 million. What's the difference? I don't really know where you are with your 1.3.
Because this was the minor grading and the B was the major.
Well, we're still doing minor.
Well, he wants to know the difference because we're going on B on page 172. And if you go to page 174 and go to number 2, this one's only 1.2 million.
Yeah, and that didn't have any road work. So if you go to option, so on 2, replacing the existing with minor grading improvements. So it's just a little bit about the abutments and a little bit of work that was encompassed with the bridge, but not road work itself. So this would increase the road safety, also make so that you have a little bit less of a decline and incline going up and down that coulee on option C, sorry.
B.
Or, yes, on option B. That's correct.
That's where I made my mistake, Dan. I took my number 3 off of the attached items there and not off the recommendation part of it. So.
And I apologize about so many options. It's just that when you're talking about bridge structures and minor and major road work, I just wanted to make sure that you guys had all the information provided.
You good, Darcy? See which one it is?
I see what it is now, but we're spending 600 grand on how much of the road is getting done? All of it through the bridge?
Yeah, all of it through the bridge. Yeah, through the coulee. There's from just about the difference between the minor and the major is that we're actually going down. We're taking a lot of that dirt from that crest,
Top of the hill,
and moving it down, so you'd have a less of a decline.
Okay.
This will still do it, the minor, but not to the extent of the major road work.
I got you.
Yeah.
I thought you were doing like 100 feet on each side of the bridge or something.
No, it's all the way.
Okay, we're good.
We're stealing dirt.
Okay, that clarification's done. Any other questions? Not seeing any. I'll call for the vote. Carried. 12.3, Terlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bridge file 75575, Township 101. So before you, the recommended motion, Mr. Chairman, is that Council direct administration to proceed with option 1 with the replacement of Bridge 75575 with a twin 2.8 to 3 meter culvert and related road realignment work at the budget of an estimated 1.215 million, with the balance of the funds 654,750 to be applied through MSI.
I see everybody's hands jumping up to make this motion. Dustin, you're good with that number 1 recommendation? Any other questions or comments? Elf?
So Kim, what's the difference in price for the, like you got steel girders here instead of cement or concrete?
Yeah, and part of the reason they do the analysis of going through between the concrete and steel girders, and so they only presented the ones when it has a cost benefit. So they go through the life of the asset, and then if for the concrete, the steels will actually have a longer lifespan, and so when you do the cost benefit, then that's why we've only presented with the steel. And I just wanted to point out, this is just for everybody's information. This was one that Councillor Vosser was talking about way back when we had the flooding. I think it was in 2011. This was the pinch point of, it goes right by a yard and then it turns 90 degrees and it's all treed in. So this was one of the pinch points that caused that water to go overland flooding and then come back through 7 persons. And so this would rectify that by opening up that channel and cleaning that out.
Okay. Okay, any other questions? Not seeing any. I'll call for the vote. Carried. Okay, is lunch here? Okay, we will take a break for lunch. We'll come back at 12:30.